There's so much information and misinformation out there about heart disease and cholesterol that it's almost impossible to know what to really believe. Well, today I'm going straight to the source, and I've got Dr. Dwight Lundell with us. He's seen into the hearts of over 5,000 patients and performed over 5,000 open heart surgeries in his career. He's going to talk about three things. First of all, what really causes cholesterol buildup in your arteries. Secondly, why certain foods you're eating might be damaging your arteries without you even knowing it. And third, why chronic inflammation is the real silent killer and what you can do about it. Let's go talk to Dr. Lundell. Hey, this is Jeremy, and I'm here today with Dr. Dwight Lundell. And Dr. Lundell, thank you so much for being here with us today. I'm very excited.
Well, thank you for having me. It's going to be a pleasure.
Yeah, it's going to be a great discussion. I want to start specifically and really just jump right in with what you've seen. Now, you are a doctor. You've performed over 5,000 open heart surgeries, which literally means you've looked at 5,000 human hearts while they're still in live bodies. And that's quite a lot. So what's the one common denominator that you've seen in 100% of those surgeries?
Well, the one thing that struck me, and I had a great career as a heart surgeon through the glory days, if you will, of coronary bypass surgery, and it was very satisfying and all of those kind of things. But I kept looking at this arteries, and I'd see the junk in there, and we talk about cholesterol all the time, but something else struck me. The cholesterol story never quite made sense to me, but I began to look at these arteries, and every one of them had the cardinal signs of inflammation. Now, those four cardinal signs are redness, swelling, warmth, and pain. Now, of course, in places in our body we can't feel it, but there certainly was redness and swelling around every one of these lesions in all 5,000 of those hearts.
Wow, so what you're saying is when we look inside our bodies, you can actually see a redness and swelling, and to me, I mean, that almost sounds just something like a rash. Like maybe if I got poison ivy on my skin, it would be that same or a similar kind of redness and swelling. Is that correct?
Yes, if you get a scratch, for example, it will be swollen and red, and it'll hurt, and it'll be warm, and you want to use that part of your body. So there's really 5 cardinal signs, but the 4 are the most important.
Right, the 4 you mentioned, redness, swelling, warmth, and pain. But I think you just alluded to this. This is something that all of those patients who were lying on your table, they weren't necessarily aware of this on a daily basis.
No, they weren't. Time magazine a few years ago had a big article called "The Silent Killer," and about chronic inflammation, and that's and since it's inside of us and we don't have particularly sensory nerves there, we don't feel it. And the other thing that's important to know is that acute inflammation, like the scratch we talked about, elicits an acute response, and lots of things happen to respond to that invasion or injury or whatever it might be. But chronic inflammation is very small injuries that happen over and over and over again, and so we don't get the same vigorous response, but we also never get the same resolution. That's part of the normal inflammatory process.
Right, and this could really happen anywhere in our body. I mean, if we're talking about a scratch, then that's normally on our skin or somewhere outside, but what you're talking about is in blood vessels. I imagine it could also happen in other parts of our body, our digestive system, our immune system, various nodes around our body, correct?
That is correct.
Okay, so it's funny that you mentioned Time magazine. As soon as you mentioned that, I just had to picture back in my head, what was it, the 1983 cover with the egg and the face and the cholesterol. just thinking about Time magazine, trying to make up for that now, which so many people use as the poster child for the low-fat craze that kind of started in the early 80s.
Yes.
So for those of us who aren't doctors or scientists, I think it kind of makes sense what the inflammation is, or at least we can analogize it to something like a scratch or a rash. But how does that sort of inflammation trap cholesterol and lead people down the road towards heart disease or other problems?
This is the crux of the matter. Really, it's the crux of the matter right here. How does that cholesterol, which is a normal substance, which we make in all of our cells, most of this cholesterol circulating in your body, 80-85%, you produced. Your dietary cholesterol has almost no influence on your blood cholesterol. So how does a normal substance cause all this problem, and how did it get to be called bad cholesterol and a good cholesterol and all these other things, which I think are complete nonsense? The lining of our blood vessels, all 60,000 miles of them, is covered by a single cell layer called the endothelium. Now, the endothelium really is the brains of the cardiovascular system. It's what makes our blood vessels dilate or contract, or to shift the blood flow from our stomach when we eat to our muscles when we exercise, or to our face when we get embarrassed. And it's really the endothelium reacting to lots of other stimuli that control where our blood goes, whether it clots, what kind of things pass through it. Because if you stop and think about it, everything we take in, food, oxygen, all the rest, it has to cross that layer to get to the rest of our body. So this is really the critical tissue of our body, is the lining of the blood vessels. And normally cholesterol would go where it's supposed to go, do what it's supposed to do. And this is where inflammation comes in. This is a single cell layer thick, and it's vulnerable to certain injuries. And when it's injured, then the cells separate from one another, exposes the basement membrane underneath it to the cholesterol. And if there's inflammation, then we get white cells. And the only way the cholesterol ever gets collected underneath that endothelium is if it's consumed by a white blood cell, which is activated either by local or systemic inflammation. So the whole fundamental is, if the cholesterol never gets trapped underneath the endothelium if the endothelium isn't injured, and if there isn't, and injury means inflammation, and so it's all connected.
Right. So all of the patients who required open heart surgery, who had heart disease, what was happening in them is that their endothelium, literally the walls of their blood vessels, were continuously or chronically injured.
Correct.
And so that cholesterol was just continuously getting trapped in there, and that led to the kind of accumulation that we initially blamed cholesterol for.
Correct. And when we have injury, the response to our body, the response our body does, is to send white blood cells there. They're our army. They're our defenders. White blood cells go and kill the germs and eat the germs and kill the viruses and clean up the junk. And so they're there, they're active, and if they see something that's abnormal, then they do what they're supposed to do. They eat it. And so cholesterol, if it's oxidized or glycated, then we actually can measure antibodies to it, and the white cells recognize it as abnormal and consume it. And that's the detail of how it gets stuck in the wall of the artery.
Okay, so before we get to how that cholesterol gets oxidized, I want to take a step back for a second. If I were to go to the doctor today, and we're going to talk about this kind of radical notion that you have, that we should actually be treating the cause of this problem rather than just the symptoms. But if I were to go to the doctor today, they would, and I had this problem, I had heart disease, a heart attack, they would probably just prescribe me a bunch of medicines, statins and a whole host of other medicines. But you think we should actually treat the cause of this problem, which, let's just start with one of those causes that you think is actually processed sugar and carbohydrates. Can you tell us just a little about how, say, eating a candy bar or a piece of bread might lead to the sort of inflammation that you were just talking about?
Yes, for sure. And the way we're treating high cholesterol and heart disease right now is just completely nonsensical. To artificially lower your cholesterol by poisoning your liver with a statin drug, is just as stupid as it can be, in my opinion.
I think I was going to say, I think a lot of our readers might agree with you across the spectrum. A lot of our readers have intestinal problems, and IBS gets treated a lot the same way, with doctors just treating the symptoms rather than trying to figure out what's actually causing it. So please go ahead.
So let's go stepwise. If the real cause is inflammation, and we know that inflammation is a response to injury, the logical question is not, what drug can I give you? The logical question is, what's causing that injury? And one of the big things that causes that injury, one of the biggest things today, is postprandial hyperglycemia. Big word which means a sugar spike after we eat sweets. And the reason is because the endothelial cell can't resist the sugar. Other cells, particularly the liver, the muscle, and fat cells, have a glucose, have an insulin sensitive glucose transporter called a GLUT4. The endothelial cell is not sensitive to insulin, so it's at the mercy of blood sugar. And if we overload the inside of that cell, we overload the mitochondrion with sugar, then we produce lots of bad things, particularly oxidative stress inside the cell, which then injures and ultimately kills that endothelial cell. So we're going back to what is it that causes the injury? And now I've just explained why it causes the injury, because the endothelial cell cannot resist having a high intracellular sugar.
Right. So if we have so what you're saying is if we have a whole lot of blood sugar at one time, or a whole lot of sugar in our blood at one time, then all of a sudden, because other parts of our body are saying, no, we don't need any more, it goes high, and our endothelial cells take a lot of that sugar in and essentially damage themselves.
Correct.
Right, and that leads to the inflammation, which we've already talked about, leads to the cholesterol getting trapped because we'll start developing those white blood cells. So
yeah, the perfect example of this is the poor diabetic patient that's not well controlled. It gives us a view into advanced rapid aging. And what happens to those people when they're not well controlled? They go blind. Their kidneys fail. We cut off their legs, and they die prematurely of heart disease. And this is all related to the fact that their endothelium is injured over and over and over again on a daily basis, more than the rest of us.
Right. And of course, like you were saying at the beginning, for the rest of, if you're diabetic, you're starting to notice those symptoms, but for the rest of us, it may just be small things that we don't even attribute to that kind of injury, like getting sick or not recovering as quickly, things like that.
Well, you stop and think about it for a minute. We do a glucose tolerance test with 50 grams of glucose, and we do it in the doctor's office under supervision for the most part. A large order of fries has medium fries has 75 grams of glucose. If you go for a fast food meal and have the fries and the buns on the burger and top it off with a milkshake and a cherry pie, you probably had 200 or 250 grams of glucose. So you've had a 5 times glucose tolerance. You have 5 times the dose that we give for a glucose tolerance test.
Right.
I guarantee you, your blood sugar's high.
Right, and yeah, absolutely. I can't even imagine eating that much sugar anymore, but I can just imagine what it might be doing in terms of what you were just talking about. So I think I'm personally convinced, if I wasn't already, that processed sugar is not the best thing for my health. But you also talk about omega-6 oils, which is something that, as paleo readers, we also try to avoid. But can you explain, just so we understand better? I mean, things like corn oil, canola oil, those were originally supposed to be kind of health boons, things that were much healthier than, obviously, the lard and things that were considered bad in the 70s and 80s. How is it that the omega-6 oil, the omega-6 fats that are in those kind of oils, are also leading to inflammation?
Well, it's a fascinating story. The omega-6s are an essential free fatty acid. That means we can't make them, we must get them in our diet. But we need a relatively small amount. And when we get too much, that promotes inflammation. And so they just, the glucose in the French fry is bad enough, but it's soaked in omega-6 oil, which causes the inflammation. This results from the big dose of glucose to be worse. So basically, it's just adding, gas to the fire if you have sugar and omega-6 oils. And it's, where did we get them? You sort of ask that. And we got them because 2 guys who were making candles out of cottonseed oil looked up one day and saw an electric light bulb and said, holy cow, we're going to be out of business. What are we going to do with all this cottonseed oil? They happened to meet up with a guy who figured out a way to make it solid and white, and it looked like lard. And so they said, wow, maybe we can get people to cook with this. So that's when Procter & Gamble patented Crisco in 1913. They did a big marketing campaign. They gave away free cookbooks. There was not 1 ounce of science to say this was healthier for you. Not one. It was a complete commercial enterprise to get rid of a byproduct of cotton that they had nowhere else to use.
Wow.
That's how we got vegetable oils in our diet.
Well, yeah, and it's amazing. I mean, like you said, that was what, 80 years ago now, and we still have Crisco around, and I'm not sure that most people who are cooking with it know that story.
They don't, but it's an interesting story. It had nothing to do with health, had nothing to do with anything. It was all about business. What are we going to do with all this cottonseed oil?
Right. Well, let me ask you this. Speaking of business, you've been a doctor, like we talked about. You practiced open heart surgeries. You've been in the medical profession. How much would you say the medical profession and related industries like nutrition are influenced by business and those large business concerns and lobbies?
There's another fascinating story. And I got like most of us, we think that we elect our representatives and we think they're good people, or we wouldn't have voted for them, and we think they're going to represent us, and lots of them are good people. But interesting things happened. I was involved many years ago in a little software company, and I went to Washington to lobby the Defense Department to use our software. And I was shocked and amazed at how easy it was to get some language put in the defense bill that favored our software. I was shocked and amazed at how little money it took to get a representative, not my own, but another one, to return my phone calls almost immediately. So that was a little tiny amount of money. And so if we start talking about big money, like, and I've written an article where I called statin drugs the Bernie Madoff of medicine, because he was really a piker. He only cheated people out of maybe 20 billion. Statins are, Pfizer alone has made $120 billion on Lipitor.
Wow.
It's helped no one. It's made lots of people sick. And so the ability of these people, and it started very early. If you go back and read my previous book about the early lipid trials, the Mr. Fit trial and the lipid research clinics and all the rest, these companies started doing what they call, it's not bribery, it's much more sophisticated. They asked me to be a consultant for them. They value my opinion. And then they pay me to go give talks. And so they stroke my ego and make me an opinion maker. And so in this way I do their bidding without really thinking I'm doing their bidding. And then I get appointed to a panel called the National Cholesterol Education Program. And guess what? 9 of the 11 docs have on that panel, which gives us our national recommendations, take money in one way or another for research or consulting or speeches from pharmacy. You look at big agriculture, you look at big sugar, you look at big soda, and we all were offended at big tobacco, but all these other industries have the same modus operandi. They obscure the science, they lobby for regulations, and they don't care about anything except what they're supposed to care about, and that's make money.
Right, and like you're saying, it's not that they're going out and finding some random doctors who are corrupt or people who are just trying to make a buck. They're doing it in a much more sophisticated way. Finding honest people who, honest doctors and nutrition experts and people who, and then kind of employing them and getting them to help them out in a way that, especially initially, doesn't seem problematic at all, but kind of leads them down the path to supporting the drugs and pharmaceutical industry.
I think that's absolutely correct.
Wow.
And I've seen it. I've been there. The last few research papers I did were for the device industry. There was a ghostwriter for it. Did I think I was doing anything wrong? No, I thought this product was better than anybody else's. But yes, I was doing bidding for the industry.
Right, right. And it's so subtle in a lot of cases, and yet they do it in such a systematic way and on such large scales that even those small subtle ways just add up. And of course the influence they have with the government and the lobbying is just immense. And not just the pharmaceutical industries, but of course the corn industry, the whole agricultural industry itself, which is also a multi-$100 billion industry. So let me ask you this. And I think you've kind of touched this, so we can guess at your answers, and most of what you're saying isn't a complete surprise to those of us who've adopted this kind of lifestyle. But if I personally wanted to eat in a way that gave me the lowest chance of developing heart disease, what 2 or 3 things would you recommend just from your experience of seeing people who've been down that road?
I like to keep things kind of simple, and so I would say eat real food.
I like.
No,
I was going to say I like that. I love that because I like the simple message also, and I think, well, if we stick to eating real food, that's as easy as it can get for people.
Yeah, if it came from a plant, or if it eats plants, eat it. If it's made in a plant, don't eat it.
That's great. I love that advice. It's so simple and so easy to follow. And also, you actually have another book that's coming out soon, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct?
We have the book, The Cure for Heart Disease, and we're working on another one, which we hope will be out midsummer.
Great. Do you have a title for that one yet?
Yes, The Real Weight Revolution.
The Real Weight Revolution. Awesome.
And real weight, one word.
Right. And you said that's due out this summer. It's not up for pre-order yet?
No, not up for pre-order yet. The other book, which we did about 5 years ago, is The Cure for Heart Disease. That's still available on Amazon.
Right. Awesome. Well, I actually have not gotten to read that. I've seen that on Amazon several times, but I think I might order my own copy to see it. But I'm definitely going to throw in a link, and I think a lot of our readers will enjoy that, especially since a lot of our readers, even if they don't have these problems, know somebody in their life who has them or has a related problem, whether it's diabetes or something like that. I think it's so prevalent now that we all know somebody, at least one person, who has these kind of issues.
Well, just to reemphasize how we have high sugars and don't know it, most of us, we have 29 million people diagnosed with diabetes. We have 75 diagnosed with what's called prediabetes. And that means every person who's eating the normal recommended American diet with 60% of our calories and carbohydrates, I guarantee you we have after meal sugar spikes over 140, which is the limit that makes you diabetic. So I just want to reemphasize that. If you're eating the normal stuff recommended, the cereal for breakfast, the bagel for a snack, spaghetti for dinner, you're getting 3 or 4 spikes of sugar every day, and it's injuring your endothelium. Is one candy bar going to kill you? Absolutely not. Is one sunburn going to kill you? No. But over and over and over again it will.
Right, and even the numbers that you threw out at first, not even counting people who are undiagnosed, I mean, that's what over 100 million people combined with the either diabetic or pre-diabetic. That's it's one in every three and a half people. Yeah. I mean, that's absolutely. I mean, it's sad, is what it is, but it's also mind-boggling to think that we've let it get this far without figuring out. I mean, you figured it out, but without actually dealing with it.
Yeah. The other thing that's interesting is if your sodium gets too low, you'll die. If it gets, if your temperature gets too low, you're sick. If it gets too high, you're sick. And the interesting thing is, if you're Mr. Paleo, why don't we get symptomatic when our sugar goes high?
Why don't we get symptomatic when our sugar goes high?
Yeah.
I mean, I'm not sure I'm going to get the right answer to this, but I would think because our body.
I don't know if I know the right answer. Seeing if you did.
I mean, my thought is that evolutionarily it didn't happen that much. I think we randomly found caches of fruit that we probably gobbled down because you would if you found them. But I don't think blood sugar spikes happen that often evolutionarily. And I think when they did, you had immediate ways to deal with them. Like you said, I mean, your body deals with it immediately. I don't think your body would think it's a bad thing to happen 3 or 4 times a year.
Yeah, I agree with you. And really it was when we found honey or we found fruit, we ate it so we could survive. And we stored it as fat, that we didn't burn immediately. So it's sort of, if we got sick, if we ate too much sugar, then that would be sort of anti-survival.
Right.
I mean, why should we be punished for doing that which ensured our survival when food was scarce? So,
and essentially it would be an acute inflammation because you would do it occasionally.
Sure. You would do it occasionally, and if it only happened, every 2 weeks or a couple of weeks a year, it's no big deal. But I think that's why we don't get symptomatic, is so that we could consume things when we found them without getting acutely ill.
Right. No, it makes complete sense, because if you're starving and food is scarce, which it has been for all of history until 10,000 years ago, then you're going to eat fruit. You're going to need it.
Yeah.
And honey.
I'm going to gobble that honey up.
Yeah, there's an amazing YouTube video of a guy in Africa climbing the tree to get honey, I think in the Congo. And yeah, I mean, they put their lives on the line to climb these trees, like 100, 200 feet high. They're getting stung 100 times while they're right around the hive, but they do it because it's honey. On the downside now, and this is a quirk of mine. I've been paleo for a long time, but I look around paleo now, and everybody just makes all sorts of baked goods with honey and things. I'm like, that's not the point.
Yeah, the same person writes an article about high fructose corn syrup and then eats honey, right? Or agave nectar.
Yeah.
Agave nectar is almost all fructose.
Yeah. I mean, look, I'm guilty of eating sugar every once in a while, but it's like they bake this stuff all the time. Yeah.
Well, listen, if you're active, I mean, I could eat quite a bit of sugar right now just coming off a 9-mile run.
Oh, yeah,
and not getting elevated blood sugar.
Right.
So it's all part of homeostasis.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That's one thing I didn't mention at the beginning. When I actually cycle through those times when I'm eating higher sugar, like especially more sweet potatoes and potatoes, those are times when I'm actually working out differently. They're times where I'm doing longer, more intense workouts. So, yeah, I completely agree with you.
Well, once again, I don't know if it's paleo, but for the last 4 years I'm been competing in Ironmans.
Right.
I'm a 2-time Ironman Arizona champion.
Wow. I think I'd read that you were competing. I didn't realize that you had won.
Yeah, won my age group twice at Arizona. And in 2011, I was the International Triathlon Union Long Course World Champion.
Wow. Well, Dr. Lundell, I wanted to thank you again. It's been an absolute pleasure today, and hopefully we'll be able to have you back again in the near future.
Okay, thank you.
All right, take care.